Well, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is heading to Russia to meet President Vladimir Putin. Araghchi and his delegation have gone to several countries since Friday to try and end the US-Israeli war on Tehran. Earlier, he was in Oman and in Pakistan, where he held discussions on regional matters. Araghchi has also held phone calls with Qatar's foreign minister, as well as Turkish, Saudi and Egyptian officials. On Saturday, the US President Donald Trump decided not to send his envoys to Pakistan, saying a new peace proposal from Tehran was not good enough. Well, Oman's Foreign Minister, Badr al-Busaidi, has released a statement following his meeting with Iran's Foreign Minister. And that says he had a good discussion on the Strait of Hormuz and went on to say, as literal states, we recognise our shared responsibility to the international community and the urgent humanitarian need to free the seafarers held for far too long. He also said that much diplomacy is required and practical solutions to ensure lasting freedom of navigation. So let's re-examine what the sticking points are between the United States and Iran. Tehran is demanding an end to what it calls aggression and targeted assassinations. It's also seeking guarantees against future attacks and reparations for war damages. Tehran is also calling for an end to fighting on all fronts, including those involving its allied groups. And it wants its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz recognized. Iran has rejected a 15-point list sent by President Trump, but that was in late March. US media say that list includes Iran dismantling its nuclear facilities and promising to never develop nuclear weapons. The US is also calling on Tehran to limit the range and number of ballistic missiles it has, to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz and end its support for regional allies. OK, we can speak now to Mark Kimmett. He's a retired US general and former Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. Welcome, General Kimmett. And we also have Giorgio Cafiero, who's the CEO of Gulf State Analytics, which is a Washington-based think tank consulting firm. He joins us live from Washington. And Mr. Cafiero, I'd like to start with you, if we may. As we wait now for movement in these talks, we're in a kind of holding pattern. There's stuff going on behind the scenes that we don't know too much about. Can you see any kind of off-ramp here that does not look like a strategic retreat for either side?
Yeah, definitely. I think there is potential for such an off-ramp to come into effect. I do believe that would require the Trump administration to show a little bit of flexibility on the issue of enrichment. I think as long as the White House maintains this very rigid stance on zero enrichment, that's going to continue to be a non-starter for Iran. But if the Trump administration would agree to a very, very low level of enrichment, perhaps even lower than what Iran was permitted under the 2015 JCPOA, I think the Iranians might agree to that. And then that would allow Iran to continue to exercise its right to enrich uranium. And the Trump administration could certainly say that everything they did resulted in a so-called better deal than the JCPOA, which Trump often calls the Obama deal. I think that could be a face-saving approach. But if the Trump administration is going to continue aligning with the Israeli government's position in favor of zero enrichment, I have a really difficult time seeing the two sides being able to take an off-ramp here.
What's your take, General Kimmett? Could we see flexibility from the US on uranium enrichment?
Well, I think we can. I think there's already been some discussion about going from the permanent banning of enrichment to this 10-10 program that we talked about earlier, where they would suspend enrichment for 10 years and then go back to their NPT limits of 3.67 after that. I think the very talk about the willingness of Iran to come up with a 5-year plan, the United States come up with a 10 to 20-year plan, which is certainly better than Iran's belief of unlimited enrichment for the indefinite future versus the United States, no, no, no. I think there's actually in the background some discussions and some flexibilities. But as your guest said, it's going to have to be better than the enrichment levels that were permitted under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
OK. Mr. Cafiero, so Gulf countries, of course, bore a good deal of the Iranian response in the war before the ceasefire took place. What is their role now in this critical time as talks are ongoing, leading up potentially, hopefully, to further negotiations? We've been talking about the Foreign Minister Araghchi. He's shuttling around between Oman and Pakistan. He's on his way to Russia, if not arrived already. He's been making calls to the Saudis, the Qataris here in Doha. He's, as I say, he's been in Oman. He's been speaking to the Turkish and the Egyptians. How important is the regional aspect to getting this solved?
Yeah, well, as I was mentioning on your program earlier, for many, many years, Oman and Qatar were the two main diplomatic bridges within the GCC between Iran and the West. Obviously, as everyone knows, because of the extent to which the GCC countries have been pulled into this conflict, it's a little more difficult for them to be so-called neutral actors. And we've seen the center of diplomatic gravity in West Asia, I think, really shift from the Gulf toward Pakistan. Nonetheless, all of the GCC states want de-escalation. For this war to unfreeze would be extremely dangerous for all of the GCC countries, very threatening to their national security, their economic health. So they definitely, I think, by and large, are very supportive of Pakistani efforts. Now, what is interesting is that Oman was hit by Iran much less than the other 5 GCC states. And throughout this conflict, Oman has been able to maintain a very normalized relationship with Iran that it's had for so many decades. And given the fact that the Iranian foreign minister just went to Muscat, given all the communication that has been taking place since late February between high-ranking Omani and Iranian officials, I think Oman is standing out as the one GCC state that is able to play a very effective and credible bridging role between Iran and other countries, chiefly the United States.
On a broader scale of international involvement, General Kimmett, one potential part of the solution for the Strait of Hormuz is a multinational approach to getting things done, to a maritime task force to secure it. And there is precedence for that, of which you have direct experience of. Just tell us briefly about that and how that could be applied to our situation today.
Well, I think if we look back in the period 2007 to 2009, the entire world was crippled off the coast of Somalia by the piracies, by the pirates and the piracy program that was being run out of pretty much a failed state, Somalia. The United States put together a coalition. All P5 members were in there, as well as 42 other countries. It was a coalition of interests. It wasn't necessarily a coalition of friends. And it took about 2 years before there was significant reduction off the coast of Somalia. Piracy is no longer a problem in that region. But when you can form a coalition of like-minded and self-interested countries, as you would see in the Strait of Hormuz, as the countries in Europe, India, Chinese are suffering tremendously by the dual blockade, I think there's an opportunity. It appears to me that Great Britain is taking the lead right now and trying to put together that coalition.
And the key thing is here that those are countries that need the strait open.
Well, that's what self-interest is all about. Exactly. $12 a gallon fuel in London is not going to win you any votes in the next parliament.
Right. Mr. Caffiero, whatever happens, is your assessment that the pre-war normal is now gone for good, especially when we look at the regional aspect, the relations between the littoral states and neighboring countries?
Yeah, back in March 2023, that point marked the beginning of the Saudi-Iranian détente with the renormalization agreement that Riyadh and Tehran signed in China. And up until February 28th, we saw Saudi Arabia and Iran take many steps to try to solidify the détente and fortress it from all the regional chaos of the post-October 7th landscape in the Middle East. I think there's no doubt that both in terms of Saudi-Iran relations and even more so in UAE-Iran relations, we can definitely say the détente is over. I think the Gulf Arab states, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE, will be engaging Iran one way or another. The GCC states have to be pragmatic, and they understand that Iran, whatever they think of the Islamic Republic, it is a permanent neighbor. But I think their views on Iran will be in a context of a lot of fear and suspicion. And I think it could be many years, perhaps more than a decade, before we'll start to see some sort of a détente in Abu Dhabi and Tehran's relationship, or the relationship between Riyadh and Tehran. At a societal level, too, we need to understand that the Iranian missile and drone attacks on civilian targets in the Gulf have caused a lot of trauma. And this is not only about how the Gulf Arab governments, but also the Gulf Arab societies look at Iran. They will see Iran now more than ever as a predatory neighbor and a very difficult country to share the region with. But again, as I said, their interests are going to be in stability in the region, and to achieve that kind of stability, which their economies depend on, there has to be some sort of a way to engage the Iranians and to try to find some sort of a tense peace with Iran, however difficult that may be.
And what about, General Kimmett, another pre-war normal, and that was the pretty steady relationship between Gulf nations and the US, a critical alliance? Will the Gulf nations be re-examining that relationship now?
Well, I think,
or in the time to come?
No, I believe that if you take the points made by your guest from Washington, that as long as Iran is seen as a predatory neighbor with hegemonic aspirations and revolutionary aspirations throughout the region, I think they will understand and maintain the strong relationship with the United States on the defense side that they have for years and years. They are also looking to the future and realize that it's tough now, but if you have a nuclear-armed Iran, it'll be even more of a requirement to have American presence here on a semi-permanent basis.
All right, gents, we'll leave it there. Giorgio Cafiero, CEO of Gulf State Analytics, a Washington, D.C.-based geopolitical risk consulting firm. Thank you, and General Kimmett here in the studio. Thank you too, sir.